So what I'm doing here is taking the basic premise of creating layers and frames in Photoshop and just demonstrating how it can work in like a walk cycle or a standard animation. One of the advantages, I guess, of using like a hand-drawn animation is that you can do things like walk cycles moving in perspective, which is a little bit harder when you've got object-based animation, sometimes like Flash and other sort of more automated systems, because you tend to have to adjust your angle and things to make sure you can reuse the same shape. Whereas if you hand draw things, it means you can get more complicated angles with things. So you've got this guy that I've just created very roughly. He's walking up and he's going to open this kind of door. He's going to open. It's basically supposed to be a safe behind a painting, and he's going up to it. He's just going to open it up. So with this animation, I've just very roughly drawn the frames in. Pretty shonky, proportions are pretty shonky as well, and very rough. And the reason it's rough is it's if you go in with a really high level of detail, especially with this hand drawn, it means that if you don't get the motion right and you've put in tons of detail, the motion is the most important thing of all. So if it looks like he's walking in a bit of a funny way and you've put loads of detail into it, you're going to have to go back and and amend all these little tweaks and all these little bits of detail that you've added in, which can be really time consuming. So the key thing is to just get the motion right from the beginning. So I've done this basic rough animation with these individual keyframes, and within this you can see that some of the layers are pretty rough, and the lines are pretty thick. And the reason why it can be quite handy to have thick lines that are pretty rough, in one way, it works in a little bit the same way as an ink blot test does, in that if you're not absolutely certain about where the proportions, where things particularly like the fingers and hands and stuff like that, where all that stuff's supposed to go, you can sketch in quite thick lines where you think everything is, and then refine those lines in order to change the size, the position, the scale, and the proportion by rubbing them out and refining them at the same time. So, case in point, say, is this foot and this leg. If I wanted to move the leg a little bit further forward or a little bit further back, I'm able to do that because these lines are so thick. I can just rub out part of the foot here and this part of the leg, and then rub out the back. And as I refine it, I'm making it more refined by making the lines thinner, but I'm also pushing the foot a little bit further forward. And similarly, if I wanted to push it back, I could just push it. I can just refine the line the other way. Rub it out to there. Just trim a bit off there. And I'm pushing the whole of the leg back because these lines are so thick. And it's quite a handy way of doing things as you refine stuff. I'm not sure why this frame has just appeared there. So as you refine things, you can actually change, if you keep the lines nice and thick, you can actually change the position, the scale and the proportion of the character and its individual parts at the same time. So that's why sometimes I keep things pretty thick. Oh, I've realised I've gone into frame 1. I should be on this frame here. So that's one of the things there. So I've just put in this really rough animation here, which is pretty basic, of the guy just walking up here, and you can see it's pretty rough. So that's the first stage, and putting in those keyframes. The second stage is refining those frames. So what I've done is I've taken each of these positions and each of those keyframes, and I've gone in and refined each one of them to add in the detail. Now, one of the things is that you can do is you can take a section of the animation. Let's see this frame here, and you can take a frame. So if I wanted to copy a hand from this frame here to this frame here, it's basically what I've done on this one actually. So for instance, for sake of argument, I'm just going to rub this one out. And if I wanted to copy the hand from the previous one, because rather than have to redraw the entire thing, what I can do is go to the previous frame, just going to select that hand, just move it so we just get that selected. Move to the next frame. It's still selected. Go to the layer that I'm using for this particular frame, and I can just grab that selection. I'm going to just fill, and I'll just move it. Oops, I'll just move it into position there. Oops, if I use the right move tool. So there you see I can use parts of the previous frames, so you're reusing sections, and you can do that. I've done that with the head. You see the head doesn't change all the way along. It's sketchy. Using that select and fill option, it just means that you can reuse quite a few bits, so it doesn't become so time consuming. Things like the feet and stuff, there's not much you can do about. Anything that's changing a lot of shape and movement, you're going to have to draw, but certainly for hands and stuff, it's quite handy to do that. What I then did was I also copied a couple of frames just to make the walk a little longer. So we've got this frame here where you've got the left leg outstretched, and I think I've copied it again on frame 9 and just simply scaled it down. So it means that you can see if I skip between these two frames, instead of having to redraw the frames every single frame by frame, it means I can copy a frame, this one here, and for frame 9 I simply copied the layer, I scaled the layer down and placed it so that the foot reaches the tip of the toes there, and that's how that happens. And you can just continue to do that, so you can get this look of a character that's walking away from you and into the distance, which is what's happening there, and he goes up and grabs the thing there. So that's the basic walk in there. The next thing is to add in a few frames in between. So what I've done is I've added a frame in between for the tweening. So these were the frames I initially had, and I've added a frame in between, and in between each frame I've put in I've left on the frame either side. So for frame 2 I've left the layers on that were in frame 1 and frame 3, and I've taken the transparency, the opacity right down, so that they become sort of like an onion skin effect, like you would get in Flash. And that means I can then do the tweening for it, which I'm hoping will work okay. So I've created a new frame in between there, which you don't see because I haven't drawn on it yet, but I've also added in the 2 frames either side. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off, normally I would start off with the head, because it's a pretty good waypoint. I select the frame before, I'll grab the head in there, just move this up and down, make sure I'm on the correct layer that I'm going to use, which is this one here, and you'll see that's fully opaque, and I'm just going to move the head to the middle so it's in between the 2 frames. With the key forms, I think I'd probably just do that with most of these things, so like the hand and stuff as well. If I grab his hand there, and I'm just going to nick that as well. I'll make sure I'm on the right layer. That's the layer after. I'm going to grab that one, go into here again and fill that one, so I've got the correct layer again, put it in the right place, I'm just going to scale it and move it to about there. So I've got the key forms there that I don't really want to have to redraw all the fingers for and stuff, and that means that I can then take the shapes in between and I can start painting them in. So let me just see, I've got the hand in the middle, I need to kind of get a midpoint between the front of the arm in here, and I'll start painting this in. And again, the midpoint between the front of the t-shirt, and then it's just trying to get these midpoints in between things in order to basically do the tweening. And the back point there. There's a lot of lines to deal with. sometimes gets a little confusing. I suppose there's some parts that I could copy and just do a copy and fill for. And just get this leg in between here. Again. With the foot again, it's just taking the midpoint between the two, so I can get the heel coming down. I'll make it go out a little bit because the front of the foot will go out in a slight arc. Bring the toe in there. So I've got this stripe on it as well. I'm not sure I get that in the right place. And the stripe goes around the foot there. And then again for this, it's a bit of a wider angle. The midpoint isn't always going to make the correct shape as well. There will be motion, the speed of things, obviously speed up and slow down, so it may be that you might get some funny shapes if you just choose the midpoint between everything. Again, just got a bit confused there. So let's just check the midpoint, it's probably about there for that. I mean, particularly this foot here, it's probably going to be closer to this back foot than it is the front because it's accelerating. I haven't done that exactly correct, but let's just see. Just using Control Alt and Z in order to undo. Let's just get that main shape of that foot in there. So let's have a look. And this is probably an instance where the shape might not exactly match. Just pull that into there. Occasionally you have to put down little markers to show where your halfway point is. And there. Let's get this t-shirt. Put in a marker there just to see where the halfway point is. Pull that in there. Let's just bring that to there. Now I'm going to kind of judge whether or not I need to show the back of that shirt, the sleeve in there. I'll just bring that in and just pull this around here. That should be pretty close to a complete tween. The foot's a bit turned in there, I'm not entirely happy with that. Let's just adjust this one. As I say, keeping some of the lines quite thick, and then you can just rub them out in order to move and change the form around. Let's rub that one out. There, that'll do for now. So I have my tween in between there, between those two frames. Now I can turn those frames off either side, and now I've got the movement between the two. just need to fill in all of the rest, which might take a time, but that just gives an idea of how to put together some of the tweening in Photoshop. So if you carry this on through, or if I carry this on through, it means I will get the full cycle and the full animation in there. It's a bit wobbly in places. It's not an amazing animation, let's be honest, but hopefully it just gives you an idea of what Photoshop can do as well. And for more basic animations, if you've got no other tools available, there are obviously some really good animation products around, including things like Toon Boom and Flash and everything else. But it depends on choosing. You just need to choose the right tool, or see what you've got using your available tools for what you need to do. And hopefully this gives you an idea of what's possible in Photoshop.